Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has inaugurated a Hindu temple built on the ruins of a mosque. The opening of the temple in the city of Ayodhya.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that this is such a flashpoint. This temple is such a flashpoint between Hindus and Muslims. As we know, the temple has been built on the grounds of a mosque that had stood for nearly 500 years before being destroyed by Hindu extremists. But
secularism is still the constitutional law of the land in India. Yet the ritual showcases a Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, whose words could be mistaken for a priest's.
Meanwhile, in United Kingdom.
How can this bloke have 80% popularity? It got me a bit worried. He's sort of reduced press freedoms, he discriminates against minorities, he's accused of watering down democracy. He seems a bit of a tyrant.
Meanwhile, in Canada.
A Canadian court has pulled up his government. He has been accused of overreach. Why? Over his crackdown on protests.
Mr. Trudeau, I'm a conscious comedian trying to awaken the masses using humor. Can I get some support?
No.
Ever wondered why Western media seems a bit off when it comes to India? Well, it's not hate, but more like a hangover from the past and some preconceived notions about developing countries. According to them, India is like this perpetual land of problems, violence, bigotry, poverty, you name it. And they have a knack for making everything about Modi. Thinking Twitter voices represent all of India. But here's the kicker. While they're absorbed in this, rural India is quietly advancing, gaining access to basics like toilets and cooking gas. Interestingly, some opposition parties even poked fun at Modi for building toilets. And Western media eagerly lapped up these comments. And there were individuals, both within and outside India, who echoed or supported these remarks. These individuals aligned with what suited their narrative to smear India. It's quite a paradox. How can a third world country aspire to be a superpower when the true superpowers are preoccupied with getting offended over wrong gender identification? Have you ever noticed how Western media showcases India's successes, but with a twist of spice? They tend to not only highlight achievements, but also throw in a generous serving of India's weaknesses, mock them, and thereby subtly undermine the accomplishments. Now, brace yourself for a video that will surely ruffle some feathers.
Hammond made some more banners, and we decided our best chance of success was to hang them on the side of the train when it stopped at stations.
This has got to be the most efficient thing we've ever done in our lives.
With one banner in place, we were like a well-oiled machine when we got to the next stop.
It captures a time when India allowed these so-called foreign entities to pull off stunts that might just make your blood boil. The infamous banner incident, where the Top Gear team strategically placed banners promoting British industry on trains. The messages turned obscene when the carriages split. And believe me, it's no coincidence at all. The subtle jabs seem to be a part of the narrative. Their hypocrisy knows no bounds. Just take a stroll down memory lane when Western media casually labeled Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar as a Sikh activist. Meanwhile, over at DW News, a German news website, they casually threw around the term extremist to describe a sitting chief minister of India's most populous state of Uttar Pradesh. Now, let's get this straight. Extremist typically refers to terrorists or radicals. So, in their discerning eyes, a leader elected by the citizens of India is an extremist. While a terrorist who used a forged passport to find refuge in Canada and orchestrate violent activities in India is conveniently termed an activist. The irony seems to have taken a holiday in their world. In 2020, India experienced significant protests particularly in its capital, where farmers rallied against controversial agricultural reforms. During this time, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau voiced his concerns about the situation. However, karma seemed to catch up with him 2 years later, when Canadian truckers, dissatisfied with new COVID guidelines unveiled by Trudeau, and they gathered in Ottawa to protest. In a stark contrast to his earlier stance, Trudeau responded forcefully, invoking special emergency powers, deploying hundreds of police officers, and freezing the bank accounts of the protesters. This heavy-handed approach was recently deemed a violation of rights and freedoms by the court. Instead of acknowledging this misstep, the Canadian government is standing firm, planning to appeal the verdict. Comparatively, when faced with internal dissent, India took a different path.
साथियों, मैं आज देशवासियों से क्षमा मांगते हुए सच्चे मन से और पवित्र हृदय से कहना चाहता हूं कि शायद हमारी तपस्या में ही कोई कमी रही होगी, जिसके कारण दिए के प्रकाश जैसा सत्य कुछ किसान भाइयों को हम समझा नहीं पाए। आज गुरु नानक देव जी का पवित्र प्रकाश पर्व है। ये समय किसी को भी दोष देने का नहीं है। आज मैं आपको, पूरे देश को ये बताने आया हूं कि हमने 3 कृषि कानूनों को वापस लेने का, रिपील करने का निर्णय लिया है।
Despite Western media labeling Prime Minister Modi as authoritarian, and even the so-called influential celebrities abroad jumped into India's internal matters, a move that the Indian government never reciprocated with Canada, by the way. Moreover, the controversial agricultural laws that sparked the protests were eventually withdrawn, reflecting a response more attuned to the people's desires. In contrast, Trudeau maintained stringent vaccine rules in Canada and employed force to quell dissent, raising questions about his commitment to freedom of expression. The disparity in outcomes underscores the contrasting approaches taken by the two countries in handling public grievances. And yet, according to Western media, India is ruled by an authoritarian regime.
A bit of a tyrant.
India is now reclaiming its genuine civilizational heritage, signaling a noteworthy departure from the historical narrative imposed by foreign rulers. Analyzing the recent pilgrimage to the Ram Temple, where 500,000 Indians gathered on day one, offers a fascinating insight into the liberation of a long-suppressed civilization from the tradition of commemorating invaders and colonizers. But how did the Western media and Al Jazeera react to this new development? Yes, you are right. Their meltdown was clearly visible. The Western media, represented by institutions like the BBC, Time magazine, and self-proclaimed guardians of the West, reflects a striking intellectual deficiency. It is disheartening to witness these media outlets shaping a narrative that depicts the construction of the Ram Temple as an assertive move by hardline Hindus, conveniently overlooking similar religious undertones in the coronation ceremonies of the British monarchy. One can't help but question the BBC's selective scrutiny and lack of courage to delve into the intricate history of Ayodhya in their propaganda pieces. The movement to reclaim identity predates political leaders and dynasties, a nuance lost on the superficial reporting of these Western media outlets. The hypocrisy becomes glaringly evident when comparing the scrutiny applied to India's assertion of identity with the blind acceptance of Christian ceremonies in Western countries. The BBC and others readily endorse the Christian nature of events like the coronation ceremony in Britain, yet fail to grasp the repercussions on Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs living in the West. Why does the coronation ceremony of the British monarch incorporate predominantly Christian elements? Could there be a push towards secularizing the British monarchy to better reflect diverse religious perspectives? They impose it on everyone, insisting this is a splendid Christian ceremony, and hence, regardless of our individual beliefs, we should all uphold the Christian faith on that particular day. Al Jazeera, in attempting to emulate a decaying original, unfortunately, becomes a mere copy tainted with rot. It becomes apparent that their silence on Qatar's human rights violations against Indian laborers exposes their cowardice. The double standards are stark. They avoid any criticism of Qatar, while quick to point fingers at other democracies in the West. This biased reporting raises the fundamental question of why the West feels threatened by India reclaiming its identity. The Western media's recent barrage of criticism post the consecration of the Ram Temple is nothing short of hysteria. The narrative they push of a mosque raised to build the temple conveniently blinds them to the historical fact that the site was originally a Ram temple. They still maintain the belief that India's history began with the Mughals or Muslim invaders entering the country, while others hold that it started when the British invaded India, and this stems from a lack of knowledge in history and insufficient research. Referring to the Archaeological Survey of India report concerning the Ram Mandir, the Supreme Court of India ruled in 2019 that the Babri Masjid was not built on vacant land, and there was evidence of a temple-like structure having existed on the land before the mosque was built. After the mosque's demolition, a significant 12th century Vishnu Hari inscription was discovered, providing compelling evidence of the site's association with Lord Ram. The inscription mentions that the temple of Vishnu Hari was constructed during the reign of Gahadwal ruler Govind Chandra of Kannauj. Overall, the Western media seems to forget that India is one of the oldest civilizations globally, with a kaleidoscopic variety and a rich cultural heritage. As for the mosque, directed by the Supreme Court of India, the Indo-Islamic Cultural Foundation is set to commence the construction of a majestic mosque just 30 kilometers from Ram Temple, starting May this year. A crowdfunding website is expected to be launched in the coming weeks. The delay in the mosque project was attributed to the necessity of revising the design to incorporate additional traditional elements such as minarets. Their shared hysteria originates from a misguided notion that their sensationalism will tarnish India's image and unfairly vilify the predominant Hindu faith. This partial reporting highlights the Western media's tendency to sensationalize and manipulate narratives, exposing their failure to recognize India's diverse cultural and historical heritage. Their primary goal is profit, and sensationalizing stories, often at the expense of facts, becomes a necessary means to attract readers and advertisers. In conclusion, the critique of Western media's negative reportage on India is not just a matter of inaccurate reporting, but a reflection of deeper biases and double standards prevalent in their journalistic practices.